Well, we talked about the flat Earth. We have to talk about arguments against climate change. We have to. Let's do it. Let's do the top 10 arguments against climate change. Okay. Number 1, the climate has changed before. The president thinks it has. Well, that's true. The climate has changed before. We actually covered this early on. Climate's changed quite a bit before. Like a lot. Some big, huge swings, way bigger than anything going on now, possibly even bigger than what we expect to happen. That's true. But humans weren't around back then, and in fact, most of the species that were around back then died when the climate changed. All major climate change events were associated with mass extinctions. It happens when your environment changes around you that a lot of creatures cannot survive. Number 2, it's natural. All right, it's fair. Maybe it didn't happen. We didn't cause it. Can't change it. It's just a thing that happens. Well, when you look at all of the natural factors that people talk about, it's the only thing that's really correlated with climate change. The only thing that's correlated with global warming and temperature increase is human greenhouse gas emissions. We saw this in an earlier article. I went to a website and we saw roughly these charts trace the path. And anything that you want to measure, if you don't include human factors and if you don't include greenhouse gas emissions in particular, you just cannot explain what's happening. And it's not that bad. Sometimes it gets cold, guys. If it gets cold, you probably want some global warming. I know that sounds like I'm mocking our president, but he is the most prominent representative of all of these views, and I want to show that people believe this. People that have power and ability to make things happen have argued that it's not that bad. Well, as the climate changes, land use changes, temperature changes, we get more extreme events. We've talked about those. Water and food security, coastal resilience. We see ice melting accelerating, oceans locking carbon to lock in change, increasing floods, droughts, excessive runoffs, dead zones, pathogens, allergens, increasing invasive species, revenue laws, aquifer depletion, saltwater intrusion, sea level rise, threatening 1 billion people, ocean pH increasing, threatening biodiversity, 99% of fishing product, hundreds of billions of dollars of environmental disasters, extreme weather, decreased quality of life, and international stability. I mean, it's not that bad as a value judgment. I don't know what you count as that bad. Some people would say that these consequences are that bad. But I guess it depends on where you are. The science is unsettled. Only if you count the 3% of people that don't actively advocate, of climate scientists that don't actively advocate for it in their papers as unsettled. It's like saying, you buy a lottery ticket, you can either win or lose, so it's 50-50. No, like the numbers are all on one side, not the other. Scientists disagree about everything. The way to make your mark in the field is to disagree with the consensus and be right about it. Most scientists, especially the ones that are not paid by industries, except human-caused climate change. The science is pretty settled, insofar as science ever settles. The science is actually cooling. Okay, number 5, it's actually cooling. Just like, no. It's like measurably not. It really isn't. You might find some spots of the planet at some times that sometimes seem cooler than at other times, but it's not cooling on average in the long term overall. Our models are unreliable. I mean, we've seen these models. You can click on this video when you get to, when you look at the PowerPoint yourself. The events that we've seen track really, really closely to what we have seen. So the models of the past really, really map onto what we've seen. They just do. Scientists have been wrong before. Okay, sure. Yeah, like they've been wrong about a variety of things. A lot of people talk about eggs, right? Yeah, we discovered eggs have cholesterol, which, hey, eggs used to be good for you. Now they have cholesterol. They're bad for you. And then we discovered that there was good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, and eggs have the good cholesterol. So now they're good for you again. Scientists can't get their facts right about eggs, so why should we trust them about climate change? Trump here is adverting to a particular instance in the 1970s, and you can look at all of these covers. The Time was arguing that maybe we were going to face an ice age instead of global warming. It would be global cooling. Reed Bryson was a scientist who advocated this view, arguing that we were producing more aerosols and that we would in fact see more and more cooling. He published 7 articles over a decade or so and managed to break into the mainstream, managed to break into Time magazine and other magazines. But basically at every point when he was publishing, he was a minority voice. And most scientists, even at the time, did not think that the Earth was cooling. Life finds a way. Polar bear population is stronger. You can click on that as well if you want. It's another cool article about how flying insect numbers have fallen by 75%. Life finds a way. No, we're undergoing a mass extinction right now. There will be some life that survives. There always is. But life as we know it, a good portion of it is dying out as we speak at rates much, much higher than the background extinction rate. Antarctica is gaining ice. This is one of those weird ones that it's kind of have to dig in to actually see what's going on. It seemed like as the ice was melting, parts of Antarctica were actually expanding. So concentrated ice was spreading out into the ocean. It seemed like it was actually getting bigger sometimes. And some people thought that there was this trend. It was a slight positive trend in the Antarctic. And that was a trend that people, skeptics were pointing to for a long time until that completely collapsed in 2016. The Antarctic collapse has continued precipitously since then. So this isn't a good argument at this point anymore. And then, yeah, I showed you this picture. It's terrifying to me. Finally, they're all in on it. That's a giant hoax. They're all messing with you. They're all lying. There's only one voice that is telling the truth, and that is the stalwart denial person that's standing in the course of history and yelling, stop, arguing the truth. Our president believes that. And in 2012, actually 2011, I believe, there was a release of a bunch of emails, tens of thousands of emails from a single university, in which 3 separate emails were picked up on by the conspiracy community, that made it seem as if climate science was hiding things. So these are 3 emails that made the rounds out of tens of thousands, in a hack in a nondescript university. The first one: I've just completed Mike's trick of adding in the real temperatures for each series of the last 20 years, and from 1961 for Keith's to hide the decline. Okay. The next one: I have been of the opinion right from the start of these freedom of information requests that our private intercollegial discussions is just that, private. Submitting to these demands undermines the wider scientific expectation of personal confidentiality. It's ironic. It is for this reason, and not because we have anything we have or have not got anything to hide, that I believe none of us should submit to these requests. And lastly, the fact that we can't account for the lack of warming at the moment, and it is a travesty that we can't. I view these, and I don't find anything at all problematic about these. This is how people talk about all sorts of things. I could talk to you about how my, my car is doing, and I would say these things. Like, the second email: who wants their emails to be public, right? The first and third email are people that are trying to make sense of a lot of conflicting data. Climate science is messy. You're using tree ring data and ice core data and known melting, right? Like known temperature rise. In the first email's case in particular, Mike's trick, there was one signal that was showing that in fact the Earth was getting cooler, but we knew from like thermometers that it wasn't. And so people were trying to make sense of all of this conflicting data. Science is messy. It has lots of data that sometimes don't point in the same direction. And so these were 2 people trying statistical tricks to try to figure out what was going on and see if they could explain what they knew was the case. Now, this happens all the time, and if you were in my philosophy of science class, I would tell you that once you start playing with statistics, you get into some weird stuff. But climate science, by its nature, relies on lots of different types of information, and making them all correspond in the same way is difficult, right? So tree rings could be growing just because one particular area was getting more rain or than the forecast said, or than the news had said. And then the last email, we don't have good measures of different parts of the Earth. All of this is being done with like minimal expenditure to actually try to figure out what is going on the planet. NASA's mission to planet Earth was not the approach that ended up winning. So we don't have lots of good measurements of the ocean or of the clouds or of land. So that was ClimateGate. Those are the top 10 arguments. And I don't know, maybe some of them convinced you, maybe you agree with me that there's not much there. One of the chapters from one of the books that we read, Merchants of Doubt, points out just how much money has been going on to try to promote this this position since the basically 1970s, when Charles and David Koch started pushing for essentially a rollback of the New Deal. David Koch was a libertarian candidate for president, and has since been trying to change perception of these their industry, which is the oil industry. So lots and lots of funding has gone on to this, and I, funding is not necessarily reason to believe that something is false, but it should make you doubt the complete impartiality of this. So anyway, unlike flat Earth, lots of people deny, about 1 in 5 people deny climate change. Think that climate science isn't real. And I just went over the strongest arguments in favor of it, and I personally don't find a lot of water in them, but your mileage may vary. Okay, let's stop here, and then we'll do the final video.